Hi everybody, it's Dr. Spear here. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about working with dates and times in Microsoft Excel. Sometimes dates and times work very smoothly and flawlessly, and sometimes they can be really confusing. And you're going to be working with these types of data a lot, so you need to understand how Excel sees and works with dates and times, and that'll help you understand how you can work with them. So to start with, I've got a column of dates here. You can see that's actually all January 1st, 2013, but then if I scroll down, very boring, you see I've got other dates. I actually have several rows labeled with dates in 2013. The first thing that you need to understand about Excel is that Excel treats dates like an actual integer number. And to prove that, if you look at this cell I have selected here, if we come over here to the formatting, you see it's formatted as a date. That's why it looks like a date. Usually Excel is pretty smart, and if you type in something that looks like a date, Excel will format it as a date. But if I change the formatting to number, you see it changes to an actual integer number, 41,275. Okay? That just underscores that Excel actually is treating this date as a number. And it's not an arbitrary number. Excel picked a date in the past, and I don't know exactly what date it is, but it's 41,275 days before January 1st, 2013, obviously. And that is day 0, and then every day after that, it just adds 1. So if you understand this, then you can understand why Excel does some of the things it does. Sometimes you'll copy and paste a date value, and it will look like a number like this, and you'll be confused. But all it is that the formatting's changed, and if you change the formatting back to date, you see that it actually looks like a date. The advantage here is that you can do simple math with these dates. So for example, let's say I wanted to find how many days elapsed between two different cells. I don't need to scroll down. Let me just type one in here. So I'm going to change this to January 4th, 2013. So it's 3 days later. And I could do something like enter a formula here where I go equals this date minus this date, and you see I get 3. It's 3 days between those two dates. That's really useful. So you can actually do math on different dates. Now sometimes what will happen is when you do the math, it'll be formatted. Excel will get confused and it'll format it like a date. And you'll see something like this, 1/3/1900. And you think, well, that's really confusing. But it's just because it thinks it's a date when you actually just want a number. So if you just change it to a number, you see that there's 3 days in between those two. So let me change these back. I'll just copy that down. Oops, and there's another problem. There's another actual thing you need to understand when you're working with dates. If you have just a number in a box and you grab this little square and you drag it down, Excel will copy that number. If you start a series and you select the series and copy it down, Excel will often continue the series. But with dates, it always treats it as continuing a series. It never copies the date that you have selected, and I proved that right here. You see I have just one cell selected, and when I copy it down, you see it actually created a series. It didn't just copy this down like I expected it to. You need to watch that because that can really mess you up. And so a lot of times you have to go Control-C, Control-V, and then I can actually copy that down. So remember that. That's another thing to know when working with dates in Excel, is that if you select one and drag it down, it will always treat it like a series. It won't copy that actual date. Control-Z to undo what I just did. So that's the first step in working with dates and times in Excel. now that we've looked at dates a little bit, let's look at working with time. And you see I've added some data here, and this is the time for each observation on these particular dates. And Excel usually works pretty well with dates, but times, it sometimes gets a little bit squirrely. The first thing to understand is that time is just like date, and that Excel wants to treat it like a number. And if it's thinking about it like a number, you can do simple addition and subtraction like we did before to find out the time that's elapsed between different observations. The problem is in the formatting and in getting Excel to understand that it is a time. With a date, it seems to pick up on dates pretty easily. Times, sometimes yes and sometimes no. So in this particular example, you see the times are here in military time. So this is 0:04, this is 4 minutes after midnight, and 15 seconds. This is a unique format. You don't see this a lot. Usually you just see these first two sets of numbers. This actually is 4 minutes, 15 seconds after midnight, 9 minutes, 15 seconds after midnight, 14 minutes, 15 seconds after midnight, and so on and so forth. So Excel doesn't always play well with these. And you see that we've set the formatting to time, and so it looks like a time to us. If we change the formatting to number, nothing happens. It still looks the same. And that gives you a clue that Excel is not really understanding that this is a time. Even though the formatting was set to time, Excel doesn't realize this is a time. And so the formatting doesn't always give you a clue. You have to look at what Excel is doing to understand how Excel is seeing this number. Excel is seeing this as just a text string. It just thinks it's like you typed your name or something like that. It does not realize this is a time, probably because it's got this extra 15 seconds on the end, right? So we need to convert this to something that Excel realizes is actually a time, okay? And an easy way to do that is a function called time value, T-I-M-E-V-A-L-U-E. And so if I say equals time value, open parentheses, and then I select this cell, what I'm doing is I'm telling Excel, hey, here's a text string that you should treat as a time. This is a time. So I'm actually grabbing Excel by the throat and saying, this is a time, treat it like a time. And so when I hit return, you see now I get a number, okay? And once I get a number, now I'm pretty confident that Excel understands that, hey, this is a time. So the next question is, well, what does this number represent? How does Excel treat a time like a number? Recall that the date was treated like a number because it was so many days past the first, the starting date, right? And so each day you add 1 to that value. And if I change this date cell to a number, that's 41,275 days since Excel decided to start counting. Well, a time is very similar, but not quite. A time is, the way I think of it is, the number here is a percentage of a day. And if you think about time, that's kind of what time is. Time is a percentage of a day. How long has it been since this day started? And from that you can infer how much of this day is left. So think of this number as 0.2% of the day has passed. Okay? And it seems right. Like 4 minutes and 15 seconds after midnight, the day has just started. Very small percentage of the day has passed. Let's just double click and copy this all the way down and see if looking at some more of these values makes sense. If we scroll down, we scroll down, we scroll down, and here we're at January 1st, 11:59, basically noon on January 1st, and look, we're right at 50%. And doesn't that make sense? Noon is 50% of the day has passed. And if I scroll down, scroll down, scroll down, scroll down, and if I look at the last observation on January 1st, you see that 99% of the day has passed. And then when we go with the first observation on January 2nd, we're back to a very small percentage of the day has actually passed. Okay? So if you think about it that way, you'll understand how Excel treats these times as a number. And if you don't like this, if this is not really a way that we write times, now that we have used the time value function, now in column C, we actually have things that are being treated as times. Now we can go to formatting and change it to time. And you see we get the correct time, 12:04:15 a.m., right? Over here, we have the same formatting. We don't get that answer. We don't get that text because in column B, Excel doesn't know these are times. Excel knows that these are times because we told it these are times. How did we tell it these are times? We used time value. So you can apply that time formatting. I like to use military time, so I go to more number formats, time, and then military time. And you can see that it converts those times to military time. You will also notice that it doesn't have the leading zeros for these numbers, but it seems perfectly fine with that. And you see in military time we go up to 1800, 2100, 2359 is our last reading, and then we're back to 004. I don't know how you say that exactly. So that is how Excel treats times as a number, much like it treats dates as a number. And in that way, then, you can understand how you can do addition and subtraction just like we did with the dates. So let's say I wanted to find out how much time elapsed between this observation and this observation. Now, I can look at this and tell it's 10 minutes, right? But in real life, you're not always going to be that easy. And so I can do a formula, just like before, where I can say equals this time minus this time, and I get that. Now, why did I get that? Think about it. You understand that I used these values, which again, Excel does not treat as a time. That was a test. Okay, it wasn't a test. I screwed up. But anyway, you understand why that happened. Because I tried to subtract this cell from this cell, but since they're both text, Excel was like, I can't do that. I can't deal with this. I need to use the time values. So this cell minus this cell, and I get that answer. Now, that's not a great answer, right? I want to know how much time elapsed between these two readings, and it's giving me a time on the clock, and I don't want a time on the clock. And this is a little confusing. This is, again, a point of how Excel can kind of get confused. You'll note that the time, or the formatting is set on time, and so that's why it's not giving us the answer we want. We want to change this to a number, which is 0.01. Okay, that's not a real useful number, right? Because I know it's 10 minutes, but I'm getting this 0.01. That's not 10 minutes. So again, what is Excel doing here? Think back to what I said, or how I said that Excel treats times as a percentage of a day. And so what it's saying is the time that elapsed between this observation and this observation is 1% of a day, basically. Okay, but we don't really talk like that. When I ask you, how long will it take to drive there, you don't say, oh, I don't know, about 3% of the day. You talk in minutes and hours, right? So we need to convert this to minutes or hours, right? Well, that's pretty easy. If we know that this is time elapsed percent of day, let me enlarge. I want to convert that to time elapsed minutes. I just want to know how many minutes there were between those two readings. And so if this is the percent of a day, well, how many minutes are there in a day? 60 minutes times 24 hours, something I can't do in my head. So I'll use Excel. I'll say 60 minutes in an hour, 24 hours in a day, hit return. There are 1,440 minutes in a day. So if the time between these readings is 1% of a day, that's going to equal this times 1440. And there's your 10 minutes right there. Now you might be confused because you think, wow, it should be like 1440. What's going on here? You don't see enough decimal points. Let's increase the decimal points, and it's actually rounding up, right? So we increase the decimal points, and that's the percent of day that elapsed between this reading and this reading. To convert that to minutes, we take that percentage of day times how many minutes there are in a day, and we get 10 minutes, right? If you wanted to figure out how many hours elapsed between readings, you go time elapsed hours. And if this is a percentage of the day, and there are 24 hours in a day, you see that you get 0.1667 hours elapsed between those two readings. Okay? So this can be a little confusing, but I think if you work through these steps, it makes a lot more sense, and it'll help explain a lot of the crazy things that Excel does when you're working with times. Now that we've talked about how Excel handles dates and times, and we've seen how to work with them, now we're going to show you how you can combine the two and work with them at the same time. So you'll notice that I still have my dates. I have the time here that is in a text format that Excel doesn't like. I've got the time here that I've converted using the time value function and formatted. So I've got the time here that Excel can play with. Now, one neat thing that you can do, sometimes you want to identify things by both their date and their time simultaneously. So I'm going to make this column called date time, which is going to have the date and the time for each row. And an easy way to do that is just simply add them. Equals this cell plus this cell. Hit return, and look at that. Now I have the date and time in the same cell. And if I double click this and copy it down, double click this to fit the cell, the data, you see that I've combined column A and column C, and I can identify each row by its unique date and time, which is pretty slick. And you recall that both the date and the time are actually treated like numbers in Excel. This is also treated like a number. So if I change the formatting here to number, you see that I convert it to a number. Now I need to increase my decimal points a little bit, and there you go. So you see that date time, and if you think about it, it again makes sense. If each day, each date is an integer from a starting point, and then each time is a fraction of a day, you can just combine the two, and you get this is actually the precise number of days since Excel started counting. It's not just 41,275, it's 41,275.00295 because we've gone a little past midnight. So if you come back over here, let's say I take this date and convert to a number, 41,275. And if I convert this time to a number and increase my decimal points, you see 00295. And so you can see how, and it makes sense if you think about how Excel looks at dates and times. This number in this format makes perfect sense. So that can be very useful. I'm going to Control Z, 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 Control Z. Now I'm back to where I started. So finally, with this, you can actually find out how much time has elapsed between any two different readings. So before we looked at how many days elapsed between different readings and how many minutes elapsed between different readings. Now we can look at between any readings the exact amount of time that has elapsed between them and doing the simple subtraction again. So if I do it like I did before, where I look at this reading minus this reading, we know that's 10 minutes. And I get the same factor that I did before. Remember, it treats them as a number, but this is a percentage of a day, right? So if I want to convert that to minutes, this percentage times how many minutes there are in a day, 1440. You see there's 10 minutes there, right? But usually I want to do something more complicated. So let's scroll down, scroll down, scroll down, scroll down, scroll down, scroll down, scroll down. So here, this observation, D290, that's the next day at 4 minutes past midnight, right? So remember D290. So that should be, 1 day or 24 hours. Actually, let's change that up. Let's look at this, right? So this observation is 1 day and 10 minutes from our very first observation. Agreed? So let's make Excel prove that to us. So we're going to say equals this observation minus and I jumped up here. I want to subtract it from our original observation. Hit return, and you see my answer is 1.00694444. So 1.0069 days between those two observations. Again, convert that to minutes equals this times how many minutes there are in a day. And there are 1450 minutes between these observations, which is 1 day and 10 minutes, right? And if I want to convert it to hours, I say equals this times 24 hours in a day. And you see that there were 24.1667 hours elapsed between those two observations. And that's it. And so once you understand how Excel is thinking about dates and times, you can understand why it does some of the things it does, and you can use this to your advantage to work with your data set. And that's my phone. Somebody's trying to get hold of me, and I'm done anyway. So thanks a lot for listening, and I'll talk to you later.